Guys, it's the football therapist here, bringing our Week 10 fantasy starts in a little bit of transparency on Week 9. After a horrific Week 8, we bounced back really good. Quarterbacks, we had 27 designated as starter sit, hit on 21 for 78%, had 51 designated starts or sits for running backs, hit on 34 for 67%, had 69 starts or sits for wide receivers, hit on 44 for 64%, and had 34 designated starts and sits for tight ends, and hit on 25 for 74%. Some of our bigger hits: Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, Big Ben, Swift, Zach Moss, Zeke as a sit, Taylor as a sit, Jerry Jeudy, Claypool, Hollywood as a sit, Hawkinson as a start, and Gesicki as a sit. Some of our misses were Derek Carr, Tua as a sit, Philip Lindsay, Jerick McKinnon as a sit, DJ Chark as a sit, Christian Kirk as a sit, Gronk, and Noah Fant. Here are some quarterbacks to start for this week. Drew Lock, he's on a roll. I had him as a start last week. I played him in a couple leagues and won those leagues. He put up 29 fantasy points. He gets Las Vegas, where they give up 21.5 points per game to quarterbacks. I'm expecting another quality start from him. Carson Wentz coming off the bye. I think that this team is getting fully healthy almost. I think he can start getting on a roll. The Giants gave up 27 fantasy points to him last time. I think he'll be a good start this week. Tua, he had a very good week last week. He surprised me a little bit, had 21 fantasy points. The Chargers, they give up 22 points per game to quarterbacks, which is fourth. I think it'll be high scoring, so Tua could be a start this week. Breeze, he put up 19 plus fantasy points in his last 4 games. They got Michael Thomas back. This team is super confident. The offense is clicking. I'd start him this week. And lastly, Jared Goff coming off the bye. You get Seattle, who is one of the worst teams against quarterbacks. I think he is a must start with the confidence against this defense. So these are my starts for the week. Here are some sits for the quarterback position. I'm going to sit Tannehill. It's a short week. Thursday night games are always funky. Indy, they give up only 15.3 points per game to quarterbacks. I think it'll be low scoring, so I'll sit him this week. Bridgewater, he played his worst game of the season against Tampa Bay, only had 8 points. I think that Tampa Bay is the team that's going to rebound after getting blown out last week. They give up only 17 points per game to quarterbacks, so I'm going to sit Bridgewater in this spot. Derek Carr, he's just too limited with his ceiling right now. He's been held to less than 20 fantasy points the last 3 games. I think they'll run a little bit more this game, try to get Josh Jacobs involved. So I'll sit Derek Carr. Kirk Cousins, he's also a sit for me. Chicago, they give up only 15.4 points per game to quarterbacks. Cook will be the guy that they'll try to utilize. This will be a very tough game for Minnesota, though. And then Joe Burrow is the sit for me. Pittsburgh, they give up only 16.9 points per game to quarterbacks. Yes, I know that Joe Burrow is coming off the bye, but I think this is a tough spot. I think Pittsburgh defense is just that good. So I'm going to be sitting him this week because I think that he'll have a little bit lower numbers than he usually puts out. Running backs to start this week, Antonio Gibson is a big play for me. Detroit, they give up 30.4 points per game to running backs. He's been a top 15 back this year. Fire him up this week. Duke Johnson is a play if David Johnson is out. He'll probably see 20 plus touches and 5 to 6 targets. I think that he will be a very good PPR back this week. Philip Lindsay, he struggled last week, but he saw more touches than Melvin Gordon. Las Vegas, they give up 22.6 points per game to running backs, so I'll ride with him again this week and hope that he produces. Zach Moss saw 11 touches to Singletary's 5 last week. I think he'll have a big game. He may not have this highest ceiling, but he'll be a good flex play in my opinion against Arizona. Henderson, I think he'll be ready to go. He's coming off that injury. I'd expect him to get the bulk of the touches. This is a very good matchup for running backs and wide receivers of the Rams, so start him against Seattle. And lastly, J.K. Dobbins is the start for me. New England, they struggle against the run here and there. They give up 18 points per game to running backs. Dobbins saw 14 touches last week. I think that this could be a real big breakout game for Dobbins, so I'm going to start him this week. There's some running backs to sit this week. Taylor, he saw only 8 touches last week. The volume is just too low right now. Hopefully he could get back on track, but for right now I'm going to sit him. Ronald Jones is also a no-go. I think Fournette is the safer play, but neither of these guys are getting many touches, so sit him this week. Devin Singletary, he only saw 5 touches this week. Zach Moss, like I just said, has been getting the bulk of the work, so I would sit Singletary. Damian Harris, he could be injured. He could be out of the game. It's a tough matchup as Baltimore gives up only 13.6 points per game to running backs. So if he does play, I would sit him. If he doesn't play, obviously, don't sit any Patriots running backs in this game. DJ Dallas, he played second fiddle to Homer last week. The Rams, they give up only 15 points per game. There's also rumors that Chris Carson could come back, Carlos Hyde potentially too, but we will have to see. But regardless, I would sit Dallas this week. And lastly, Joe Mixon, another guy who is banged up. Pittsburgh gives up only 15 points per game to running backs. It's a very tough matchup. Coming off the bye, coming off an injury, I don't really want to start him this week if he does play. Here are some wide receivers to start, mostly flex guys who I like this week. Michael Pittman Jr., he saw 7 targets last week. I believe that he could continue seeing those targets. Tennessee, they give up 28.3 points per game to receivers. So I got a good feeling about him this week, so I would start him this week. Fulgham, he's not going to have a reduced role in my opinion. He saw 7 targets before the bye. Jeffrey could be returning, but I still think he's going to get good volume and be a big part of this offense, so start him again this week. Jarvis Landry had 11 targets before the bye. I'm expecting a huge rest of season for him. Houston, they give up 28 points per game to wide receivers. I would start him this week. Hamler could also be a flex play this week. Vegas, they give up 24 points per game to wide receivers. He saw 10 targets last week. I think this Broncos team will continue to pass a ton if they can't get their running game rolling. So start Hamler this week, potentially in those deeper formats as a flex. John Brown, he could be back. He saw 11 targets last week. He had a big game. I expect similar volume in what could be a high-scoring matchup, so I would start him this week. And then Darnell Mooney is really interesting. He saw 11 targets last week. The big thing is he only had 5 catches. The quarterback play from Nick Foles just isn't that good. But if he could see that volume going against Minnesota, who gives up 31 points per game, I think that he could be a really good flex play this week. So Darnell Mooney is going to be a big play for me this week. Some wide receivers to sit. Marvin Jones, he had a disappointing week last week. Washington, they give up only 15.8 points per game. So whether Golladay plays or not, this is a big sit for me. DJ Moore, also a sit. I don't really know what has happened to him. He's the 4th option on this team, it seems like. Tampa Bay, they give up only 21 points per game to wide receivers. So until he can have that bounce back performance, I'll sit him for other options. Cole Beasley, he only saw 3 targets last week. As I just said, John Brown looks to be back fully healthy. I'd sit him this week as I think those 2 guys, Diggs and Brown, will get the bulk of the targets. Christian Kirk also is a sit. He's been hot, but I worry about his usage in this game. Buffalo's secondary has been hit or miss, but the defense looks to be getting a little bit healthier, so I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about this one. Marquise Brown, I think that he's going to break out soon, just not this week. New England, they're a quality defense. His targets still aren't there. He hasn't been seeing more than 5 targets any given week, so I would sit Brown this week. And lastly, Thielen is a big sit. Ever since coming back from the bye, he hasn't produced more than 5 points. Chicago, they only give up 16.7 points per game to wide receivers, so to me, this is a sit for Adam Thielen. Here are some tight ends to start this week. I'm starting Robert Tonyan. Jacksonville, they give up 11.4 points per game to tight ends. He's kind of been up and down these past few weeks, but I think he scores in this game and will be a good start. Austin Hooper, if he returns, I think it's a favorable matchup. Houston gives up 9 points per game to tight ends, and I think that he will see a good amount of targets like he saw before his injury. Irv Smith Jr., he had 2 touchdowns this week. I think that this could be a really good matchup for him. As we talked about with the receivers, Chicago's very good against the receivers, but they give up almost 10 points per game to tight ends. So I think that he could see a touchdown this game, see some targets if the guys on the outside are struggling. Dallas Goedert, he's also going to be a start. I think he's fully ready to go now. He'll see the targets and have a good game. And lastly, Gerald Everett, he saw 9 targets before the bye. Yes, they threw a lot, 62 times. We're not going to see that much, but they could see anywhere from 40 passes in that game. because Seattle, their defense and their secondary isn't that good. So I would start Everett here and hope that he scores. Here are some tight ends to sit. Jonnu Smith, he gets a tough matchup. Indy, they give up only 3.7 points per game to tight ends. I just can't trust him this week. And Trey Burton, the reason I'm not trusting him is because Mo Alley Cox came back. Jack Doyle may or may not play. And the targets were kind of split evenly between those three guys. So I don't really trust the volume there for Burton. Russ Dwelly, same thing. He kind of split with Jordan Reed last week. I don't really trust the volume to be confident enough to start him this week. Jordan Atkins, same thing. Him and Darren Fells kind of split. These are a lot of guys who are splitting time and they're not seeing consistent volume. And let's say Hunter Henry, he's kind of been up or down this year. He's lost a lot of his targets to Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. The receivers there are being used a lot. He's also seen his reception totals go down. He only had 4 receptions last week, and that's just not good enough for me to be able to start him in a very interesting matchup with Miami. The top defenses to play as streamers. Not many good matchups this week. I still like Green Bay against Jacksonville with Jake Luton in. Perhaps the Packers can get a turnover or two. Eagles against the Giants coming off the bye. This Eagles defense could have a huge day. Then I'm going to stream potentially Tennessee in the Thursday night game. I think it could be a little bit sloppy. Thursday night games always are. And of course, Indy, they kind of struggle on offense here or there. Again, thank you guys for watching my starts or sits. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below and check out our full article on our website.